10 a.m.
Welcome, everyone, to our October edition of the ABA Engineering Academy's engineering webinar. We produce these these webinars every month. It's on the third Tuesday, of the month, and we have various guests to be with us during the webinar to talk about things that are of interest to engineers, both technical and legal and IP and anything that we run into for broadcast engineers. Our program is actually sponsored by Max Connect Group. If you're not familiar with Max Connect Group, they've been around for a good while. They're actually based here in Alabama, but they are a full service engineering company. They sell everything, I think, from microphones all the way to the antenna and maybe the uh, tower lights as well. So make sure that you contact them. They have all kind of different pieces of equipment out now, both in analog and digital and IP. So we appreciate their support. If you get a chance, just check out their website there. You can see the the website there listed at the bottom of the slide. So we appreciate their support. Not only do they support us in the webinar, but also all the other activities that the engineering services handle here in Alabama. We have classes, engineering classes. Some of you have probably already attended our classes. We do radio and television for both radio and television engineers twice a year. We do two radio and a TV one in the fall, and also we repeat them again in the spring. So if you'd like more information, you can go to the ABA website and see the information there. John George, who is normally our co-host, or is our co-host, is not with us today. He's lost somewhere out in the Midwest working on a transmitter, and said the internet connectivity was not very good out there on his cell phone, so he was not going to be able to be with us. John normally issues some interesting information about, especially about EAS. So I'll mention this one thing in passing. The ETRS Form 1, which was originally the deadline to file that was October the 4th, that has been extended for obvious reasons with the hurricanes that we've had. We've had two, and I saw in the news this morning it's another one out in the down in the Caribbean, and we're not not sure where it's going. But the commission, because of the problems with the two hurricanes, they have extended that deadline to this Friday, October the 18th. So if you have not filed your Form 1, ETRS Form 1, you need to get that done by October 18th. It's really, excuse me, it's really a simple procedure. When you go to the website, it self-populates with all the information from last year, and you just need to make sure that everything on there is correct. One thing you need to pay attention of when you do that is to make sure that the version of software for your EAS device is the right one. So when you're filling out that form and checking it out, make sure that you go through and make sure that it's got the right version of software on there. We want to talk about today IP. We talk about RF on these programs, video, audio, digital audio, and all. But as most of you know, most broadcast operations are now reaching pretty close to be 100% controlled or being use IP for their distribution and creation. And one of the things that's happening now is a lot of the operation, both production and storage and other devices like that, are being done in the cloud. And a lot of people are not really up to date, I think, of really how the cloud actually works. And we have with us today, and I'm very, very happy to have him with us, our good friend Wayne Pasita from Texas A&M University. And Wayne, welcome to the program.
Well, Larry, good morning and thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and a good morning to everyone that has joined us.
Wayne is just has a head full of knowledge when it comes to EAS. I mean, not EAS. What am I talking about? IP stuff. And I lean on him a lot with the issues that we may have in our system down here. And so I asked if he would join us and talk a little bit, Wayne, about where we are with IP and broadcasting, and especially how that ties into to using the cloud for technical and production and storage.
All right, well, very good. Well, I put together just a few slides to serve as maybe some background refresher for some, or maybe a good primer for others. So let me get that going here, and we'll get started here. Let's see.
Yeah, I got your slide.
Yeah, I need to get it full screen here. All right, hopefully that should be coming. So to get us started, I thought maybe a good place to start is try to define, well, what is the cloud in terms of IT? And I think one of the challenges you come into is the scope of cloud computing, or the use of the cloud in the IT environment, can be pretty broad. So you really have to sort of put things into context when we talk about. Our friends over at the National Institute of Standards and Technology offers a pretty formal, I guess, a formal definition. You know, the kind of the other version of what is the cloud? Well, it's just somebody else's computer. So there's, kind of a couple ways to look at that. When we talk about what are maybe some of the cloud service providers, there's certainly a pretty long list of providers. Some of these you're probably very familiar with. Maybe some of these names you're not. That are some of the major. And it's interesting to note that the top three, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, they represent probably 65 to 70% of the entire market, with the remaining providers taking up that balance. So a lot when you hear about cloud will usually be from some of these providers. From a broadcast standpoint, uh, as you had mentioned, yes, I think the use of the cloud as a service is becoming pretty popular in the broadcast world. And this is certainly not a comprehensive list of the type of services that are out there, but some examples of broadcast specific use of the cloud that exist. And that can range from simply storage of content to active, let's say, workflow steps such as transcoding or audio processing, uh, or even your automation system in the cloud. In fact, there's been work done to really put pretty much the entire broadcast station in a cloud type environment, which, if you really think about that, that really changes that architecture. And those racks sitting there behind Larry and his image there, well, I don't want to say they are a thing of the past, but we may not have rooms full of racks and equipment going forward in the future. But when we talk about, particularly, I might mention Amazon, because they have a very specific service offering that's uh, available for media services. In other words, that's an area where they really have targeted, and they have sort of this family of products and services that you can put together, which pretty much allows you to create a infrastructure, particularly for content delivery, all in a cloud and environment. Now, we have more than just our content to worry about in our broadcast stations, but if you think about a lot of the playout content and all, there is a platform in which to build upon, and obviously that's become a pretty major offering for Amazon. Of course, if we're going to put our content or use services remotely, we have to access that. And of course, there's several ways to do that, but it all involves the network. That might be a public network, which if a public network is involved, we certainly want that interconnectivity to be encrypted through encrypted tunnels, or certainly protection of that content, or there also might be some private networks involved for obviously large scale type environments. If you look at most cloud providers, they're going to offer one of these two, or a combination of these, of public network access and private network access. And generally access points they're not ubiquitous, in other words, everywhere. They're located at kind of strategic points around the country. So if I'm a major provider and I want to do a direct connection, let's say to Amazon, then I'm going to have to make that direct connection to a certain geographical location. Well, what is really the cloud? Well, again, I think we mentioned it's just someone else's computer. In reality, that's true. It's basically a data center. And obviously, data centers can take on many forms, sizes, and scopes. But when we talk about cloud computing, it's really hard, I think, to separate some of the terminology that is used in terms of talking about data centers. So briefly, I want to talk about just a little bit of how data centers are classified. Um, the Uptime Institute has kind of drives the industry standard in terms of classifying data centers, and they're really ranked by reliability. If we look at a tier one data center, that's kind of the lowest level, and you look at that reliability of 99.671% and think, well, that sounds sort of okay. But then you look at it, well, that's about what, 4 days uh, of downtime a year. And all of a sudden that doesn't sound so good. So you move up, let's say the ladder to a tier one data center that gets a little better reliability, but still we're up in several days that can be down, and finally to a tier three, and finally we get up to a tier four data center that now that's sounding pretty good. But to reach that, that's a lot of infrastructure in terms of redundancy and stuff. And of course, that reliability can also turn into dollars when you are purchasing services from either a cloud service provider, or in turn, maybe that is a direct to a data center. Also might mention there is a tier five data center, at least in the marketing literature. And whereas the Uptime Institute does not recognize a tier five, you have companies such as the Switch that offers what they refer to as a tier five data center, which really takes that even beyond. It's kind of interesting to note this particular data center is located in Las Vegas. And a few years ago at NAB, they were doing some actually tours of that. So they'd pick you up at the convention center on a bus and take you east of the convention center out to their data center, which is sort of rare because often the internals of data centers are pretty secure. If we think about these tier ratings in the data centers, there's also a tier rating for network providers. And I think it's interesting to note that simply they're sort of right opposite of our. So when we think about a tier one network provider, that's the highest, the highest level that exists. Whereas in the data center world, that highest level is a tier four as far as a recognized standard. So with that in mind, it's, kind of important to understand the context. Are we talking about the data center or we're talking about the provider? So with that, that's kind of some of my background slides, just for discussion, help us maybe in discussion purposes today. And with that, Larry, let's hopefully have a discussion about some of the, I guess, details about where we might use data centers or cloud computing in our broadcast environment.
I think the first one that I ever saw was way back before they actually called them the cloud. There was actually a data center in Atlanta that housed the servers and all for major companies like Sears and Belks and I had to go up there. They actually housed the computers for Auburn University, and we had to go up and put up a satellite dish to pick up the the Auburn University football games because they were going to feed them over that server. And it was very interesting. And you may have seen the early versions of these. When you walk in, you have to walk through a sticky mat. You can't take anything to drink in there, any food, and you walk through this little sticky mat to get all the dirt off your shoes. But when you went in, it was like about 40 degrees in there. It was really cold. But when you walked down, it was like, uh, if I remember correctly, it was like little chain link fits rooms, and you would walk by one and it would say Sears, and you walk by another and it would say Montgomery Ward's, and there was all these computers and all in there. And I went into their master control, and it looked like going into the Star Trek control center, of the Star Trek of the
Yep.
USS Enterprise. And the guy was showing me around, and he said, "We offer several different areas of service." Said, "We will either just host your equipment, we'll give you a place to put it, and we furnish they had a whole bunch of bandwidth internet stuff coming in and generators and all that." And he said, "We'll just host your stuff if you wish, or we will actually host for another tier. They would host it and maintain it. And then their top tier was they furnish the equipment. You just feed all your data to them." And I think that must have been the early days of what we now call the cloud.
Yeah, I think if you go back, where I think of as some of the first shared facilities, they were referred to as co-location facilities.
Okay.
And that's kind of that environment, at least that you're describing there. And yes, even still to today, the different cloud providers, what are you actually buying? Well, there's several things that you can. One is simply an infrastructure as a service, and that's just a platform in which you can, let's say, load your own software on and operate and so forth, all the way to a platform as a service, which generally is some type of application that you might utilize. And then there's, of course, maybe some intermediate levels. But when you buy services from data centers, again, you can be buying just kind of raw, what I think of as raw computing power. And generally, you're going to purchase that power maybe in the number of cores of the processor, the amount of memory, the amount of storage. And again, you load your own software and you operate. Of course, some of the advantages when you need more of any of that, it's usually a pretty easy to ramp that up pretty quickly and so forth. So you see a lot of organizations that somewhat may have seasonal needs. That's a way to address that. to, again, the other end of that platform where you have a platform as a service and you're subscribing to really an application. And that might be, well, just to throw out some examples, like one of my slides there with some of the broadcast information. I had Radio Cloud that offers automation services in that regard. Telos has audio processing in the cloud. Actually, Telos has a lot more than audio processing. I think my slide was specific to that, but they have, a lot of their products that you can purchase, either a on-premise hardware box, or you can purchase that application that exists in a cloud environment. And I think I saw a question pop up, but
Yeah, I saw a couple come up, I think.
Yeah. Let's see. Ray is asking about firewalls for radio. Small. Okay, let me read that here. Well, certainly, I think a firewall is essential for it's a small radio station or a large. The discussion of what is a good one, that can be a fairly in-depth one, but certainly pfSense is, I think, a very legitimate open source software application for firewalls. That is going to take a little bit of housekeeping on your part to keep that running and so forth. On the other hand, when you move up to some of the more commercial, like the Fortinet was mentioned as a commercial, that subscription that you're purchasing or subscribing to really, I think, is paying for some of that housekeeping. There are a lot of commercial products that are basically running pfSense code in them, but that subscription service is sort of doing that housekeeping for you and so forth.
Yeah, I see Kurt made a comment, Kurt Harnett made a comment about using cable service. You might comment on that.
Well, I'm probably shouldn't comment on cable service. I'm generally down on anything that the cable company is going to do for you other than provide raw connectivity. They want to, of course, like everybody else, they want to sell you something or sell you some service. So I'd rather just, okay, the cable company is providing me raw connectivity. I'd rather put my my own infrastructure that I know I understand and I control, rather than having someone else determine what they feel is best for me. I see the MikroTik is mentioned as a product, certainly a very cost-effective and I think highly capable product. The Ubiquiti UniFi product line is another one that I actually use that one personally in my own home network.
You mentioned earlier about applications that run on somebody else's server. I've noticed a lot of that is going on now. We use in our classroom there in Birmingham. We also teach audio recording and mixing, and we have a service from or have software on there from a major company that has a really good digital audio workstation, and they have just recently have a system now where rather than buying the software and putting it on your computer, they actually have it in the cloud, and you can actually pay a yearly fee, and it's there in the cloud, and you can, no matter where you are, at home or in your studio or even in a hotel room, if you're traveling, you can access that, and your files are stored on there. And one of the greatest advantages that I saw in using it is that when they come up with updates or they have fixes of bugs and all, you don't have to worry about that. They keep it updated, and
Yes.
any problems, they can catch those and fix those right off the bat. So that's sort of a plus, I think, in using applications that's stored by the company or furnished by the company there in the cloud.
Yes, I think that certainly is. If you think about in your broadcast plant, again, maybe it is a small radio station, or maybe it is a television station, like is in the image in Larry's background there. Think about all of the individual pieces of equipment that needs updates and so forth. So as what often is a specific piece of equipment performing a specific broadcast system workflow function, when that is viewed as just a software application that is now moved to a cloud in a common environment. And also, of course, when we talk about, I should have mentioned, when we talk about cloud, you sort of assuming there's going to be virtualization involved. That kind of goes without saying in a cloud environment, although certainly you could have a dedicated hardware with a dedicated application, but in most cases, virtualization is going to be involved. And of course, there's different methods to do virtualization, ranging from kind of that traditional virtual machine hypervisor environment up to today, where I think the container environment is certainly the dominant way to do that in the industry. But that updating is a lot of those duties, or that housekeeping function goes away, or that burden is really on someone else to take care of.
Sure. You you mentioned the word, and I'm glad you did, because it's sort of new to a lot of people, and that's container environment. Uh, could you talk about that just a little bit for people that's not familiar with that?
Yeah, containers is it's just it is I'm going to call it the current state of the art technique for doing virtualization. Again, virtualization can be done several ways, where you have several different virtual machines that exist on one hardware platform, and whether that's a cloud environment or an on-premise uh, environment, that virtualization, where you have a hardware platform that's then going to have an operating system, and then you have the individual applications that exist are considered containers, and then you have I guess, a manager of the containers. In fact, I noticed Kirk is with us. He does a really excellent webinar on the use of how Telos uses containers in the virtualization of their products.
Yeah, we had and Kirk, feel free to chime in. We actually had Kirk one time on our program talking about that, and if you've got something to share, Kirk, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks. I just came here to learn, and learning I'm doing. I
Oh,
appreciate it.
okay, okay. Glad to
Well,
have you with us.
I probably saw Kirk's webinar. This might have been where I saw it, but he does a really good job of not just talking about containers, but kind of looking at how virtualization has evolved. And that's really what's happened. It has evolved from that virtual machine hypervisor environment of the early days to maybe current technology today.
Uh, Speaking of the cloud in general, if somebody is interested in maybe exploring that, what are the preliminaries before they actually jump in the creek to get started with the cloud? What should they gather to use as a guideline of what type of service they need?
Well, I think first you have to define of what you are looking to do. Am I looking just for a environment to put an application in that I want it to be there. I want it to be there and available, but I don't want it to be dependent upon, let's say, a server sitting in a rack behind me, so to speak. And that might direct you to one of the cloud providers that is selling that infrastructure as a service. And again, you generally, I'm going to say in most of them, and I'll use the example of DigitalOcean. That's one that I'm familiar with. And just about as fast as you can get your credit card out, you can set yourself up a cloud environment to experiment with.
So I guess it depends on what the station wants to do with it, whether they actually want to just use it as a storage device or if they want
Exactly.
to do actually applications.
Yes, and if you think about storage, let's talk about that because that is a really, really popular use of cloud computing, particularly a lot of times for backup storage, because that's a way to create an offsite backup, offsite premise backup. And again, back to your credit card, how do you, how do you pay for that? Well, most of the service providers that are doing cloud storage, they're going to charge you based on that capacity, that capacity um, that you're subscribing to or signing up for.
I know in the television area, there is a lot of, or there's several companies out now that make these units on-premise storage, where, as you know, they archive a lot of information, and they
Right.
where they can bring up something at a moment's notice if something, if a news story breaks or someone passes away or something, they can bring that information up in a hurry. And that can really get to be a storage problem if you're trying to do it locally. So I would assume that would be something that would be really advantageous to a TV station for offsite storage of news clips.
Yes, and that's a good example to bring up. You have to think about the size of these video files you want to, it's one thing storing Word documents or, well, even this little PowerPoint I had, it was in a cloud environment. But when you have a video file, particularly maybe some high definition video, that can be a pretty good size file. So a lot of times, I'm going to refer to it as a cache server that is that local on-premise device that is really kind of the interface. And depending upon that connectivity that you had, whether it's across we'll assume across the public internet, as most are done, then that cache server can communicate with the um, cloud environment and maybe some enhanced ways about using what I call some of the enhanced file transfer protocols rather than that industry standard or IT FTP program that is sort of slow. There's such things as super file transfer, and there's different names, FTP plus, and oh gosh, there's kind of a bunch of those that are these enhanced file transfer programs that let you basically get that file back and forth a lot quicker, particularly on the retrieve side. And that's generally where the challenge is.
Do these off-site storage system, and I'm speaking primarily from a storage standpoint now, do they offer backups to what they have, or is it just do they back it up themselves?
Well, I think that goes back to what level, usually when you're buying a service like that, there's a SLA or a service level agreement associated with that. and that service level agreement will have specify how that is done. Again, big providers, and go back to Amazon, there is no such thing as a Amazon data center. It's a whole bunch of data centers geographically spread across and of course interconnected. Same way for Amazon or with Google, same way even with Microsoft, and even some of the earlier or smaller service providers. There's multiple data centers generally involved. That so they're performing a certain level of internal backup. But again, it kind of goes back to what are you paying for?
From a technical standpoint, and all the engineers on this call are aware of the importance of redundancy. That's so key in our business to stay on the air 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that's really a huge thing to look at. And I know I was watching the other day a good friend of mine, John Cooper, who is actually a front of house mixer for Bruce Springsteen. And he was going through all the backup stuff that he has. He has, of course, his main engine on his digital console, but he has a backup. He has a mirrored image storage engine. He has an A engine and a B engine for redundancy. He also has backup feeds coming from the monitor mixer, backup feeds coming from other microphones. He said he said most of the time his backups has backups. So he said he doesn't want a Bruce Springsteen concert to go off because of something he did. So redundancy is so huge in that, because that's a lot of money. If the show stops, it's the producer doesn't like that. Well, the same thing in broadcasting. If the broadcast program stream stops because of something failed that you didn't have a redundant piece of equipment or a way to patch around it, that's really a problem. So I guess that's why I brought that question up, is redundancy on all this stuff that's in the cloud. We always, as engineers, try to look for the weak link in our program system and try to find ways around the weak link. And I suppose these companies that offer this type of service, they look at that, I'm sure, really close to make sure that there's nothing that's going to fail, that's going to lose all your data.
Yeah, and that goes back again to that what data center is actually involved, and is it that tier 4 data center with effectively the highest redundancy that is available? And again, it kind of goes back to what you're willing to pay for. But kind of one rule of thumb that has been around the IT industry for a long time has been the 3-2-1 rule for backing up critical data. This is not applying necessary to everything, but critical data is you have 3 copies of that critical data, 2 different types of medium, and 1 off-site or offline or off-site. And that same can be applied to your infrastructure. If you think about very few broadcast stations have the luxury of having a backup transmitter site, although there are some that do. We often have redundant infrastructure in our facility, and maybe we have an auxiliary transmitter on site, but again, I think it's rare to find that second transmitter site. But I can think of one particularly I visited in North Carolina that they literally had 2 physically separate, completely separate and functional transmitter sites.
So the key there is just like in the on the cloud storage, whatever your budget will allow.
Exactly.
You can have as much redundancy as you wish, or as much redundancy as your budget will allow.
Yep. And if you think about from a broadcast standpoint, one of the things that we really hadn't talked a lot about, we've talked about the cloud and we've kind of talked a little bit about the station, but back to that network that's going to interconnect the cloud and your station to the cloud environment, or maybe the cloud to directly to your transmitter or transmitters if you're maybe in a network or a multi station operation. The reliability of the network becomes very, very critical. Do you have backup networks? Well, you'd mentioned in your, I guess, advertisement for our sponsor, Max Connect operates a product that is, I've seen quite a few of those used for backup STL links for transmitters.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of that, and I see a lot of stations now using two different ISP units coming
Yes,
in. They will have maybe a dedicated one, and then they may have a cable modem or something coming in,
exactly.
and by using the appropriate equipment, it will actually fail over automatically,
Exactly.
and so you don't lose anything like that.
Yeah.
So I don't think we can underestimate the importance of redundancy and all of this stuff to try to stay on. I
Yeah, it's like the same reason. Why do we want to have a redundant, a redundant transmitter or a secondary we never get rid of the old transmitter. That becomes our backup transmitter when we get that new one.
I recall when we put in new transmitters and we kept one as a backup and actually had it on an auxiliary antenna. And that was really for me, if the main transmitter failed at 2 in the morning and I got a call, I just bring up the backup transmitter and say, well, I'll work on the main in the morning. I'm not going
Yep.
to go out. I can just switch over to that, so it works real well. One other thing in the time remaining, we're talking about storing and applications and operating stuff in the cloud, but there's still a lot of stations that have a lot of equipment. As you say, the picture behind me there is like an ingest center at a TV station. So there's still a lot of equipment and devices that are housed locally in a broadcast facility. And as we talked before we actually went on the air, most all of these nowadays are connected by some form of IP. And one of the things that I've run into is how do you maintain securely but effectively some sort of database so that the technical staff can be able to get into these units with the correct IP address and the username and log in to service these units. Do you have any thoughts on the best way to do that? I've seen people actually put post-it notes or label maker stuff on the front of it with the IP address, but there again, you and I talked about it's not good to also put the login information. So there should be a way to do that to make it uh, efficient use by the technical staff.
Yeah, I think that is actually can be a challenging problem. And it really goes back to kind of the scope of things and the size of the facility. If you're the one man, engineering department, in a lot of ways, it becomes a lot easier. And it can be as simple as your little black book you have in your back pocket to keep that type of information on. But even with that, let's say you have all of that information, but there's like somebody else needs to know about that black book in case something happens to you. So you tend to use some type of uh, whether again it's let's say a custom application. You might just simply take I know for a long time I quite honestly used an Excel spreadsheet that was encrypted, was password protected and in term encrypted for that sort of thing to store that type of information on. Where it gets a little more complicated, actually a lot more complicated, is in a larger facility where you have multiple, let's say you have a multiple engineers and several people need access to that information. So how do you do that? So that brings you to maybe some shared type password vault, for instance, is a way. Probably the best way for that larger environment with multiple people is to use some type of identity server or application that you might subscribe to uh, for that. So the identity server is actually accessing the individual pieces of equipment, and you as an individual have a unique login that you use to access that server. What you do is logged, so there's an audit trail of what you did, when you did it, and so forth. And particularly when you have that multiple people environment, once again, kind of goes back to what kind of budget do you have to work with, the scope size of the facility and everything.
Yeah, okay. Let me, as I understand what you're saying, that type of system, all the credentials for the piece of equipment, IP, login, and all is in the server or in the program, and you just have a secure login for yourself to get in there, and you don't have to remember. That way, you don't have to remember all the login information for each piece of equipment.
Exactly. It's like, well, let's take a Cisco TACAS server to access, all your Cisco devices, for instance. The individual device logins, passwords are all in that server. Me, as a user, I really don't know what those are. I'm simply accessing that TACAS server. I'm being authenticated that I'm a legitimate, and then I'm being directed to that particular piece of equipment. Either I've used the IP address to name it, or I've set up maybe a DNS name for a particular device.
I think we got a question somebody asked about a radius.
Yep, Radius is certainly a viable product. Again, when you look at specific products, you'll find, I think, a mixture um, of open source type software solutions that you sort of roll your own, or you purchase a commercial product, or even again, a lot of the manufacturers are moving these applications to a cloud environment for that overall authentication and identity type management things.
Yeah, I think there was another question from I was reading this to see what it
Yeah,
said
reading
there.
about it involves, I think, using Chrome
Right.
far as
Actually, that was my comment, and I'd love to have an opportunity just to voice it. For years, I used some other password managers and ended up switching to Bitwarden because LastPass got compromised in some ways that were difficult. And I've also been using the password manager within Chrome, thinking, well, it's convenient. I don't know. Well, Dave of Dave's Garage, who has a YouTube channel, and he seems very authoritative. He's a former Microsoft developer. He wrote Task Manager, among other things, and he's got a good channel. Explains a lot of stuff. And he explained that he feels like Chrome's built in the browser credential manager, password manager is really good. And so he says you really should use it. So thank goodness I'd been using it anyway across all of our 14 now 21 radio stations. And the way we do it is we have an engineering account with Chrome, Google Chrome, that I will go to a computer and log into. We have two-factor authentication built into it. And when you're logged into that and your Chrome browser, synchronizes with that account, you get, we have bookmarks for all of our equipment, whether it's IP radios or automations or codecs or transmitters, or all the stuff is on there. And the passwords are stored in that too. Now, we tend to have a passwording scheme for both low, medium, and high sensitivity stuff. The high sensitivity stuff tends, I won't get into all that, but anyway, that's a convenient way for me to get into anything without having to remember too much, just proving who I am.
Yep.
And that
Good
works
point.
pretty well for us. And I was really glad to hear Dave say Chrome's password manager is really okay.
Yeah, that's good to hear that. Certainly, I personally use Chrome password manager, but it's good to kind of hear that confirmations from someone that is noteworthy, such as Dave, that it is good. Not to say it will never be compromised, but let's face it, Google has got a lot more resource to put into security that I think any one of us ever would.
It-
Let me
it-
mention something.
Is this built into Chrome, or is this
Yeah.
something you subscribe
No,
for?
it's there.
It's free. I pay for
Yeah.
Bitwarden every year. I use that kind of as a backup in case there's something ever goes wrong with Chrome. I've got everything in Bitwarden too, and you can save a lot of other stuff in Bitwarden, like you could with LastPass if you want to save Social Security numbers or the grandchildren's birthdays, or documents. You can save all that kind of stuff in Bitwarden too. And the nice thing is, with any of these, you can access them from anywhere. So I could even have to use somebody else's computer. This is also what I like about a remote access, remote desktop program. I happen to like DW Service, but there are others that'll work in your browser too. So one day I was just getting to church on Wednesday night, family dinner, little Bible study, and I get a call. We got a radio station with a severe problem, and I don't have my computer with me, so I find the church library that I'd never been in before. And I said, "Can I use your computer?" And they said, "Sure." So I just opened Chrome, and I didn't have to log into my Chrome account. I had memorized my remote desktop access credentials, so I was able to do what I needed to do from the library computer. So there's a lot of benefits to doing, like all of our station documents. My business partner, Larry Fuss, he keeps coming up with spreadsheets on his computer only. Larry, do this in Google Docs, in Google Sheets, and we all can have that. You don't have to pass it around, figure who's got the latest version. Just do it online, and it's safe and secure, and any of us can access it. And so, most of us work for companies that do that too. Like at Telos, we all use Google Workspace, but other people use Microsoft, Office, Office 365, and that kind of thing. But those kind of using those kind of things are just so helpful. I use Google Keep a lot. It's secure, also. It's secure as my Gmail password is, and I keep all kinds of information there. I'll just you can find a lot of applications for keeping stuff where you can find it.
I find a lot of stations as I travel around, and I'll ask them, or they'll call me or something, said, "I need to do so and so, but I forgot my password." I said, what did you do? Well, I wrote it down, but I don't know where I wrote it down. So this something like this is really advantageous to have a way to have that stored, and then have only one that you're authenticated. And you mentioned, Kirk, the thing about two-step process authentication. I think that's really
multi-factor authentication.
right.
Yes.
Right.
Wayne, if you don't mind, for something that you said early on, you gave some applications that people are using cloud computing or virtualizing for, whether it's on premises or in the cloud. People can make up their own mind about that, but I wanted to point out that it's neat when there's something that you kind of know about or have seen or heard that you realize, oh, that was all done in the cloud. And one of those was, my employer Telos has this virtualized intercom platform, VIP. Right. And being a radio guy, I'm not that into intercoms. When I was doing TV weather, of course, I had a thing in my ear, but if you watched coverage of the Queen's funeral or the King's coronation, that television coverage all coordinated in the cloud with Telos Infinity VIP. And one reason was it had to be set up fast. They didn't have a lot of notice on this stuff, so they set that up, and everybody had phones with an Infinity app on it, so they could, the camera people, the floor directors, and all that kind of stuff. And then there's a web channel called chess.tv. If you're a chess nut or fanatic, they go around, they produce chess matches on TV. I think they have some apps too, but that's all done with Infinity VIP. And then I think there's probably some ones that I can't talk about, but there are missiles and Air Force bases that are using cloud-based or on-premise based, but IP-based intercom systems.
Can I add a little something to something Kirk said? You mentioned the different levels of access, because as we're doing all of this, cloud stuff, everybody's worried about security. Even the broadcast products are becoming aware of the need to have 2 or 3 different levels of passwords, from someone who's just a user, maybe taking readings, to someone who has to have control, to someone who has to be an administrator. And then that is something that we should be paying attention to as well as we do more in the cloud. Who needs access at what level?
Yep, that's a very good point. That I've kind of always felt things should have kind of about 3 basic levels of access, from just a view only type status to, like, the other extreme would be full access to configuration and so forth.
Yeah, that's one thing the EAS people have gone with. All
Yep.
the EAS devices have a user login, which can actually go in and look at the log and check the log and stuff, but they can't do any configuration. And then there's administration login, which you have access to do any configuration.
Yep.
I guess in closing, when you're going out, and all of this in the cloud is hitting the public internet, so it goes without saying, and we've already talked about this a little bit, but you might have a final comment on it: the importance of having a dependable firewall before you hit the internet, because anything can get through and get out. So that's really critical when you're using the cloud, because this is not the cloud is not I guess it's not a dedicated connection to to another server.
Yeah, I think, the fact that a firewall is needed, that's just sort of this fundamental baseline, item that you need, whether that's an appliance, whether that's maybe some open source software that you've implemented. I think anytime you're going to access a cloud service, you're going to use encryption. And depending on how and what your application is, maybe that's an encrypted tunnel into that cloud infrastructure. Your example of the TV station storing news clips and recalling news clips, likely that would be a perfect application where you'd have an encrypted tunnel between that edge device in your station and that cloud service service provider. But there's that kind of basic fundamental cybersecurity steps of, okay, utilizing multi-factor authentication, having strong passwords for that login is very important. And then, of course, that kind of third is the encryption of the communications between those involved.
And I'm sure all these cloud service companies will work with you to help you get that set up so that you can have the most secure connection to their server possible.
Yeah, I think, and you'll even find that they will have their own, let's say, rules, even for something about, well, what is a strong password? Well, there's a lot of, I guess, best practices regarding that, but they'll usually have some minimums, and often, for many years, the 8-character password was kind of considered the minimum. Well, I think that that number now is a little bit higher in terms of the number of characters, and also even the composition of those characters. There's more intelligence involved in verification uh, before they'll even let you utilize something that might be construed to be weak.
The old admin days are gone.
Those are gone.
And I see stations a lot of times use their call letters and their frequency. And I said, no, don't do that.
Don't do that.
Your password
Use
should be
11
something entirely different.
That's right. Use your competition's call letters or something, not yours.
Well, Wayne, I sure appreciate your time today and all the information that you shared with you. I think it was most informative. And as we continue to move along, and I'm sure that IP is going to grow even more, and we just really got to stay on top of it to make sure everything is secure as it can be. Because you look over the last few years, there's been some. Well, we mentioned before the Sinclair deal. That was really a bad deal.
Yeah.
But now some people get into things just to be playing around, but it's disruptive. So you really
Yep.
want to take care of that. But thanks again, Wayne. We appreciate you being with us. And
Well, thank
and-
you, Larry. It's always a pleasure to join you.
And we'll end this one by telling everybody that we'll have another seminar coming up, a webinar coming up in November. It will be on the 19th, the third Tuesday of the month, on November the 19th. So mark your calendar for that, and we'll be sending out information on who our speaker will be on that particular one. So with that in mind, we'll say goodbye and thank everybody for watching today. Thanks, Wayne.